Hello, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. I'm James Durham, the Deputy Director of the Maryland State Law Library in Annapolis. I'll be the moderator for today's program, and I'd like to begin with a few announcements and introductions. First, please click on the green chat bubble located in the lime green circle at the top of your webinar screen. Click and drag the chat box to the right side of your computer screen. That way, it won't block your view of the PowerPoint during the presentation. Please keep the box open so that any messages will be visible to you. And if you'd like to submit a question for later in the program, please feel free to send the question through the chat box. I'll collect those, and we'll be having a Q&A session at the end of the program. Our program is produced in collaboration with SRLN, the Self-Represented Litigation Network, and SCCLL SIS, the State Court and County Law Libraries Special Interest Section of AALL. Please note that our webinar is being recorded for later posting, along with the PowerPoint, on the websites of SRLN and SCCLL. This webinar is part 2 of a 2-part series on access to justice. Today's webinar is entitled ATJ, Best Practices for Court, County, and Government Law Libraries. I'm joined by 2 panelists. Sarah Galligan is the director of the Ramsey County Law Library in Minnesota. Joan Ballistri is the director of the Anne Arundel County Public Law Library in Maryland. And a third presenter who is unfortunately unable to join us today helped pull the program together, and we're actually using many of her slides, and that is Janine Liebert. She's the Senior Public Interest Librarian at Los Angeles Law Library in California. We're also joined by Michael Bernard, the Database and Operations Manager for SRLN, who will be handling technology issues behind the scenes. Thank you, Michael. I'd also like to thank Catherine Alternator, the SRLN Coordinator, for generating the idea of a joint SRLN-SCCLL webinar, and also for supplying the software and tech support to make the webinar series possible. The main portion of our webinar will last approximately 50 minutes, with 10 minutes remaining for questions and answers. Chat will be live during our webinar, and I'll be monitoring your messages. So with that, I'll pass the baton to Joan Ballistri. Enjoy the webinar.
Okay, thank you, James. First slide, please. Okay. So we're going to be really talking about access to justice through access to legal information. In an article recently submitted for publication in the upcoming National Center for State Court Trends publication, we say, law libraries have long served self-represented litigants' information needs. As providers of neutral spaces and income-blind services, law libraries play a unique role in providing essential services to self-represented litigants. Through collaborations with the courts and other organizations, law libraries can expand services to promote access to justice. By serving the needs of the SRL, and I will use this abbreviation interchangeably for self-represented litigant throughout, law libraries have been the de facto self-help center in many courts. This is evidenced by the many discussions on the unauthorized practice of law and legal information versus legal advice for years, maybe even before it was an issue for the courts. Law librarians are the experts in legal information delivery, and sometimes will be the only triage point in the court or community. I think it's important that courts recognize the service law libraries provide. It's up to us to let them know. If a court is working to create a new service for the SRL, the law library is a great starting place or perfect partner for collaboration. The King County Public Law Library, if you look at their website, it says, without access to information, there is no justice. Today we will discuss the services that law libraries can and do provide the SRL. And I'm sure many or most of you with us today do, in fact, provide the needed service to the SRL. I'll start with an overview of what law libraries are doing, and Sarah will continue with a discussion of best practices for creating a library self-help center and a look to the future. And then together we'll take on Janine's part as we further discuss the role of law libraries in access to justice through innovation and collaboration. Next slide, please. Last year, a report on the results of a survey was released. It was entitled Library Self-Help Programs and Services, a Survey of Law Library Programs for Self-Represented Litigants, including Self-Help Centers. It was conducted by the Law Librarians Working Group of the Self-Represented Litigation Network. The survey sought to answer the question, how or if law libraries are involved in court self-help centers, and what other services are law libraries providing to the SRL. There were 153 responses. There were 81 different identified libraries from 33 states, government and academic. The identified libraries consisted of 59 government, which is the court, county, state, federal, and prison, and they're all the blue and purple colors there on the graph. And there were 22 academic who responded. But the answer to the question was overwhelmingly yes. Just about all, 98%, provide service to the SRLs. So what are those services? What are law libraries doing to serve the needs of the SRL? From the survey, we have an overview of what law libraries are contributing to access to justice through service to the SRL. Next slide, please. Service to the self-represented litigant can be found at many levels. Some of the services can be categorized as basic, or those that were reported the most. Emerging or intermediate services were those not mentioned as frequently. Self-help centers could be considered the advanced level. Court libraries at the most basic level can serve the information needs of the self-represented litigant with the existing collection and resources. Many of the services reported were really just access to the general basic library services of reference and research assistance and access to library resources. If there's a court or county law library, there can be service to the self-represented litigant. But I'd like to stress the importance of a professional law librarian at every level. That should, I think, be understood as a given. Next slide, please. At the basic level, law libraries provide reference and research assistance in person and on the phone. Most libraries reported access to print resources, including special collections for the non-lawyers, such as the NOLO publications. And they provide access to online resources, and this includes Westlaw, Lexis, and free state resources such as the codes, regulations, and case law online, as well as special information databases for the non-lawyer, such as the NOLO Legal Information Reference Center, and websites for the non-attorney. With these resources in place, it would be good to consider how the law library could be more welcoming, accessible, and comfortable for the non-attorney, with special attention for the special needs of the SRL. Again, if you provide traditional or basic library services, if you have a law library, you have the ability to provide these basic services to the self-represented litigant or non-attorney. Next slide, please. The library should develop and or maintain a list of referrals. Many times it is evident that what is needed is legal representation or the services of a special program for family law, foreclosure, or bankruptcy. There should be a way that this list could be made available to those who would need a referable. In my library, we have a county pro bono services directory that was developed in conjunction with Maryland's Pro Bono Resource Center. And now that we have it in its word processing format instead of just the paper brochure, we can make it available electronically on the library's Pro Bono and Self-Help Wiki with hyperlinks. We also have the People's Law Library in Maryland that maintains an online directory for the whole state as well as a legal clinic calendar. But it's also important to make this referral information available to others who might be in the position to work with the SRL. Other court departments and public libraries, and our plan now is to make it available in every courtroom and at scheduling conferences. But many law libraries indicated they provide access to court-created forms and instructions if available. And if those forms aren't available, then basic form books will do. Law libraries make basic equipment available to the SRL and all their users. That would include public computers and printers with access to the Internet, word processing, and email. Libraries offer public fax, copier, and phones. Maybe less a need for phones with most people having cell phones, but you might want to have a space for people to use the phone. And they have scanners for public use. So really, except for resources primarily for the self-represented litigant, such as the referrals to legal services, collections for non-lawyer print materials, and the specialized website, most court and county law libraries already have what is needed to provide the self-help services to the non-attorney. Next slide. Looking at the survey results, though, we can see that many libraries have taken service to the SRL a step beyond the basics by expanding reference and research assistance by taking into account the special needs of the SRL. This includes explaining the legal process. The starting place for the SRL is quite different from that of an attorney. Explaining the legal process is essential before they can even begin to deal with their legal issues. Remote services can be provided with email and chat. Having a link to an Ask a Librarian service, sometimes in conjunction with a public library Ask Us Now service, or by just adding an Ask a Librarian email link on the library or court webpage. Libraries provide assistance to prisoners by answering prisoner mail. This is especially needed in those states without centralized service to prisoners. Libraries are creating guides and pathfinders, online and print. All of ours we've added to a wiki FAQ page. There we have the advantage of live links and remote access by users. One library even reported that they write articles for the local newspaper on legal topics. Law libraries create and manage websites for the self-represented litigant. Again, the Maryland State Law Library's People's Law Library is a good example. But librarians can also assist with the state's law help page or even the court's webpage to make information available to the self-represented litigant. Document delivery is another service useful to the self-represented litigant as well. Some libraries have made referral sheets available for other court departments. These are called prescription pads, as developed by the Sacramento Public Law Library, and I've copied this idea. And it helps in communicating what is needed after a referral. The SRL often forget or mispronounce what they need to the point that we really don't know what they mean, and having this RX sheet saves a lot on questions, and we can get to the starting point sooner. Next slide, please. Librarians are not only providing access to court forms, but they're also providing assistance in filling out forms, assembly assistance using guided interviews like Hot Docs or ATJ authoring software. They're providing forms in plain language or other languages. They're also creating or rewriting forms in plain language and writing instructions for forms. E-filings is a service beyond basic computer access and is a great opportunity to work with the court. In our court, e-filing questions are to go directly to the clerk's office or the help desk. But in the library, I can still make sure that library computers are equipped to handle the e-filing, that they have the ability to create a PDF or access the Odyssey, the program for e-filing, and that users have access to the online training resources. Attorneys are required to e-file, but the self-represented litigant is not. Some libraries are even providing on-site notary service, and those with limited English proficiency can benefit from books and brochures in multiple languages, interpreter and or language line access, and even bilingual staff. Next slide. Law libraries provide a variety of special programs designed to educate the self-represented litigant directly and indirectly. Libraries reported holding workshops on topics such as legal research, self-help resources, family law, landlord-tenant, wills, discovery, expungement, foreclosure, guardianship, debt collection, small claims, and e-filing. Libraries have been producing webinars on such topics as ready reference, legal research, Westlaw, expungement, proof of service, commencing an action, or searching court records. But law libraries are also hosting webinars that were produced by others on topics such as access to justice, the unauthorized practice of law, and family issues such as divorce and termination of parental rights. Law libraries are providing trainings for public library users and public librarians on legal research and legal resources. Other special programs provide legal assistance. These include limited legal advice clinics, which can cover certain legal issues or just provide a number of attorneys to answer basic legal questions. In my library, we have a Lawyer in the Library program where volunteer attorneys provide legal advice for up to 20 minutes, weekly in the library and monthly in our public library. And libraries also reported that they facilitate mediation programs with trained mediators. Next slide, please. Self-help centers are examples of libraries taking service to the SRL even further. Results showed 3 different configurations of self-help centers. Law library support of a self-help center located outside of the library, a self-help center in the law library operated by another organization, and the most common was the library-operated self-help center in the library. The survey collected information on services offered, staffing, recruitment and training, funding, budget, hours, restrictions, eligibility, how long the center was in operation, statistics and evaluation, PR and marketing, and other organizations that might be involved. Law libraries support external self-help centers through collaboration and referral systems and resource development. They partner with other organizations like the court, bar, or public library. My library is an example of a self-help center in the law library operated by another organization. Our court has a grant from the judiciary to operate a family self-help center, and then they contract with legal aid to staff it. So we're able to work closely, more than we could when the center was on another floor. And this provides a more seamless referral to the development of resources and referrals for the center clients. And now Sarah will talk about the library-operated self-help center in the law library and the future role of law libraries in access to justice and self-help. Next slide.
Thank you, Joni. Well, welcome everyone to the webinar, and what I'm going to be explaining, again, it's really exciting to have the two reports, one of which Joni just elaborated on, which was the survey report, and then the Access to Justice white paper, which allowed us to approach what we can do in our law libraries from a tiered approach, meaning that there is really no one-size-fits-all, given where we all are, from basic to intermediate to advanced. But the idea is that having done the survey, having done the special committee on access to justice, we now can say we have replicable information and evidence that law libraries can marshal existing resources into a fluid self-help model with colleagues that are out there that are doing this that can assist basically in all the tiers. So as we're trying to expand services, there are law library programs at the intermediate and advanced levels that can showcase components or their best practices on how to develop more structure and to develop a more structured self-help center service inside the law library. So Joni's really described a lot the self-help center at the basic level. I'm going to go more into the intermediate level, which is a focus on the law library operating or hosting the self-help center in the library, and there were quite a few of those that were reported through the survey. And then as far as the advanced model goes, we're going to look at focus on the law library ownership of the self-help center with best practices for administering the self-help center in the law library. Again, there aren't very many of these around, but there are some established programs, and their particular emphasis is having a professional attorney on staff who is integrated into the law library service model. Next slide, please. So again, the basic model, we're talking about a self-help center plus or de facto self-help center, and I really like Joni's elaboration on the fact that if you have a law library, you can be a self-help center, because many of the resources that are available for self-represented litigants are easy to get a hold of, especially NOLO Press, and further elaboration with forms if they're not already available through the state court. There are ways to get a hold of those as well. But again, the tiered approach, this is derived from the self-represented litigation survey and the white paper. The white paper was a result of the 2014 Special Committee on Access to Justice. This was the report that looked at all types of libraries, not just state court and county libraries, but also academic and private, on how we could all come together to provide access to justice or support access to justice partnerships. Today's presentation, however, is focusing specifically on state court and county law libraries to establish some benchmarks and best practices for self-help center delivery in the law library. And as far as the white paper goes, I want to hold out right now that Rita Dermody took the lead on that particular piece to the white paper to establish what a basic, intermediate, and advanced model would look like. So I give her credit for pulling us together and doing that basic description and explanation of what those component practices would look like, so we can build on that with those who are trying to expand and move forward. So drawing from the survey and the white paper, we can say that we have verifiable practices for success in developing self-help centers and law libraries. Next slide, please. Before we go into looking at exactly what those components are, it's important when we're exploring how to develop a law library self-help center to consider and to be prepared about expectations and boundaries. And this would be applicable to all models, but especially when we're working with outside partners. And with regard to staffing the self-help center, I think the law library has to decide how much they are able to give of law library staff support and how much they're going to seek outside supporters, other partners with similar missions. But I think there could be an expectation that the law library staff might provide more than they are able to, or there may be external groups that don't have a clear idea of what the law library role might be. So I think it's important to consider how to communicate with partners on those particular issues, especially with respect to the next item, library funding. If the potential partners, it's great that the law library can host the clinic, but if a potential partner sees that as an opportunity to divert law library money to a greater self-help center model and then so as to preempt what the library service is all about, then I think there's a need to protect library funding and to be aware of some of those challenges. The other would be unauthorized practice of law concerns, especially I think we're all familiar with that and preach that to our staffs. But there may be issues around, especially in the self-help center environment, as more and more self-represented litigants come through our doors and become self-proclaimed attorneys or self-help guiders or whatever, advisors, that there may be need for policies to make sure that the person that's been helped in the center, gone through court, doesn't come back through our doors and then starts recruiting and helping patrons, giving legal advice based on their own personal experience. So in that regard, I say maybe there needs to be a policy regarding unauthorized practice with regard to staff, but also possibly with regard to patrons that might be coming, who believe that they've become a legal expert due to their personal experience. As far as, I just want to jump back a little bit to an experience that we had with and it was a great opportunity. We had a few years ago, one of the family court judges approached the law library, and she was very concerned about the inefficiency of and the incompleteness of the forms that were being filled out in family court by pro se litigants. And she said, is there anything that the law library can do to actually sit down and help these people fill out their court forms? And I said, no, that's really not something that we do. That just like others in the courthouse don't do that, we don't do that either, and try to draw that line about giving legal advice. We certainly will help people find a form or explain how to set up an email account if they're doing document assembly forms, but we have to be careful and rein in those expectations. However, that did open up when I spoke to the judge about the ICANN forms, the document assembly forms were being used in Hennepin County and Minneapolis. And it was an opportunity to say we can certainly support that aspect of helping people fill out forms. So it kind of got us off the hook, but it also showed that we were willing to help out. And as it turned out, Hennepin County was very positive about their experience with using the technology forms and the ease of use among their population over there. So that has now become the standard for the Ramsey County Court, is that in family court they do want ICANN forms filled out, and it's made for much more efficiency of accuracy of the forms and completeness of the forms. Next slide, please. Okay, so here we go. Here's the intermediate model, and without going over the basic components again, what Joni described as a basic model sort of assumed to be in the intermediate model. But moving on, is the Self-Help Center is now hosted by the Law Library. And the survey indicated that when the hosted Law Library Self-Help Center was a partnership, typically the other partner putting the self-help center into the law library was the court. But some people are using legal aid attorneys for staffing. Some are using and recruiting their own pro bono attorney volunteers. Typically, the self-help center in the library is a brief advice clinic, approximately a 30-minute session per client or patron. There's usually a specific subject matter or a restricted area of law that's being covered, for example, family law or criminal expungements or housing conciliation. The clinic is not there full-time. It's a designated afternoon or day that has restricted hours, not a Monday through Friday operation. And if, for example, the partner is the court, the training is usually done with the attorneys, is usually done by the court. With regard to library staff support, that's definitely worked in, and there could be workshop opportunities that could be just with a spin-off from that particular subject matter of the self-help center. For example, family court self-help centers in the libraries. A library may put up a child support workshop or paternity workshop, something like that. Joni covered a lot of the workshop possibilities that are available. But these would be coordinated by the librarian. Some might even be given in public library space outside of the library. Third, the library resources. We've talked a little bit about that as well. Library resources, we need obviously a public space or private meeting area. And I might add that the new state court and county law library standards that are being drafted or almost under approval as we go closer to July in our annual meeting, that does have an indication that the law library doing the self-help center should be looking at private attorney-client consultation space. So adding that in is something in the new standards. So obviously there needs to be some private space for people. And again, obviously the equipment, the computer equipment is needed so that people have the computers and printers and scanners available to fill out their forms. Forms and instructions, especially instructions that explain the legal process. Forms, if the state has uniform court forms, it's very easy to have those available. If not, published resources can work, and Joni's covered a lot of this already. So I think we'll just move to the next slide, please. So other areas, again, that are pretty common for work in law libraries, but again, at the intermediate level, referrals and triage. So triage may involve triage to other library resources, triage to related agencies, triage. We've seen in here at our particular clinic where we had someone come in to meet with on a conciliation court matter for our clinic. She met with the attorney, and as they were talking through her conciliation court claim, it turned out, and it had to do with a claim for back wages that she hadn't been paid, but it turned out the person informed the attorney that she was also being harassed by this person, and so we were able to take that particular issue and ramp it up to court services where they were able to actually put her in touch with resources for dealing with the harassment. So we were able to take her from one and then move her to something else, and besides that, she was also Spanish-speaking, and they had a Spanish-speaking person available, so that was another added benefit to that. We have people coming through our housing landlord-tenant clinic who are imminently going to be homeless, so we have referrals to homeless shelters. And then on our criminal expungement, we host and don't administer at all a clinic with regard to criminal expungements. And so, again, that's an issue where people are having difficulty with getting housing because of a criminal expungement process, and if they need help with landlord-tenant issues, then they can come to that particular, our landlord-tenant clinic. And then as far as partnerships go, again, this is a core value for any kind of access to justice initiative. The survey that we did explained that about 45 of the respondents, and it was a good response. The survey, we had 153 again responding, but 45 of them said that they did work with legal aid organizations in partnership to provide meeting spaces, clinic space, free library memberships, use of equipment, research assistance, public relations for legal aid programs, reference and current awareness. And they were collaborating and partnering for grants, planning workshops, discussing issues, and providing clinics. So there's lots of opportunity for partnership, and again, lots of colleagues that can inform others on what they're doing. With regard to marketing, some standard marketing ideas, we're putting out website notices, flyers in community organizations, referrals from legal aid providers, signs in public libraries, links from websites outside the community. And if the Self-Help Center is a partnership with another agency, then obviously that's a doubling of effort because both agencies, the library and the other agency, can try to do as much marketing as possible. Next slide, please. So, some partnership concepts. Law Library Self-Help Centers, very obviously, the library that's not involved with the Self-Help Center has to start out by looking for prospective partners, and that would be an agency that has a similar mission in mind, but is doing a little bit different outreach in access to justice than the law library is doing. But hopefully there's some local partners that can be identified. And then there's approaching them to talk about collaboration and maybe negotiating exactly what the law library piece of that would be. If the law library, moving to the next item, decides to recruit volunteers, it could be the library or the other agency, but depending on the workload, it may be that the library will have to rise to that particular assignment. And if that's the case, what I do here, I do the recruitment, but I always check the credentials of the attorney volunteers that are offering to provide their services. And then there are other incentives to try to entice them to come aboard and work with us. Next slide, please. So some more operational concepts are that the Library Self-Help Center may train the volunteers. More likely, if it's an outside partner, that partner, like court staff, would be training court staff or training the volunteers or finding an expert. But what we do here is whatever the training opportunity or training materials are, we've put those up on our website, and if a volunteer attorney forgets totally what's going on, they know they can go to the library website and find the training information on our particular clinics. Obviously very important, depending on how the Self-Help Center is being run, to establish Self-Help Center procedures. And with regard to ours here, we also use law school students. So we've got library staff, law school students, and the pro bono attorneys, as well as a first-come, first-served procedure that we use. And so we have some basic procedures that are defined, and those are available to the law school students as well before they come and join in with us. Communicating to partners is really important, whether it's informally communicating with the volunteers as they come aboard for their particular rotation through the clinic, or with regard to doing something more formal with meetings, and those could be meetings with the partners involved to update and identify ways to innovate the partnership. Those are important as well. And then there's also the opportunity to celebrate, to recognize the volunteers and hold that out for what they're doing, because it is so very important and so valuable. And then if there's opportunity to do evaluation, whether it's ongoing or if it's at some point in time an evaluation is happening, it's really important to get that information. Next slide, please. Okay, so we're up to the advanced model, and there are not too many libraries out there that are at the advanced level. The advanced level, again, has components of the prior models, but here the library has ownership of the Self-Help Center completely, and this is a model where the attorney is on the library staff, providing the combination power of the librarian and the attorney. So the white paper defines some benefits of that. This is giving a complete integration of legal advice, brief legal advice with the law library and the law library resources, this is looking at a full-time service model such that Monday through Friday, all hours that the library is open, there is someone on staff that can be the go-to person with regard to legal information. And two libraries that are kind of standout libraries with regard to this particular model are Sacramento County and Travis County, Texas. Sacramento, California, and Travis County, Texas. So some advantages of this model are that there's going to be no income qualifications required. People get assistance at a point of need basis. There's ability to draw on the expertise of both the librarian and the attorney. Legal research materials are available. Sometimes people can actually seek longer than a 30-minute session, as we're seeing in most of our self-help clinics that are hosted clinics. The library staff are going to be available to answer legal questions that the attorneys aren't handling, and then there are obviously the research tool, the reference tools available. And again, there's training and marketing involved. With regard to marketing, I guess one thing I would say is that as the ownership of the self-help center becomes more internalized, that the library not become isolated in forgetting to market to the outside, because that's also still going to be a very important aspect to the operation. And training may be done, again, by library staff at this point because everything's been incorporated within the walls of the library. Some of the opportunities then for this doubling up of the library staff with the attorney is that they can create research guides and forms and videos. They can create workshops together. They're providing a neutral environment for discussing patron needs. They can provide referrals as needed. They can partner with the court to move the patron more effectively through the court and make that smoother. And they can also partner with other organizations. And I just wanted to share, I was very pleased to talk to Lisa Rush and Coral Henning at both Sacramento County and at Travis County about their particular operations. And indeed, they do have these full-time, in Travis County's case, they have a 1.75 for civil and family, and then they have a 0.5 person that's there for suspended driver's license, people that are trying to get an occupational license back. They have one full-time attorney who does 4 hours processing people through court and then 4 hours taking appointments in the library for giving legal information, but the line is very narrow and probably some crossover into legal advice. Lisa mentioned that another county, a couple more counties in Texas, one is upcoming to develop this model, and one is kind of reviewing that particular model. And they also make big use of triage. The librarians read over forms and make sure that any documentation going to the attorney with an appointment, that things are read over and accurate. The librarians end up answering the easier questions. There's no conflicting out. There's no income screening. With regard to paperwork, they can flag areas in a person's paperwork that a judge can be aware of a problem area, so that they can kind of focus on what they see as the problems. In Sacramento, they also have they do clinics based on same-day appointments. They're mostly civil in scope at that particular location, but they also have a bilingual paralegal on staff in addition to the attorney, and that's for Spanish speakers. They make a big push for triage, and both the librarian and the paralegal will screen cases online, interview the client, and then decide where to refer a person. Their appointments can be an hour to 90 minutes. They try to give people a lot of instructions. They'll actually draft up forms. There's saclaw.org is the website. There's lots of information that can be seen there if anyone is interested in doing that. But very inspiring. Even though there aren't very many of these out there, it looks like King County is now getting involved in this particular model. and it looks like a very exciting advanced development for self-help centers and law libraries. Next slide, please. So we don't have a lot of information on funding, and at this point in time, if anyone wants to enter information they might know about their own funding in the chat box, that would be great. I will say that the Travis County and the Sacramento County both, because of the sort of compelling and mandatory interest by the court in their programs, the court is funding what they're doing to a certain degree. Next slide, please. So benefits to self-help centers and law libraries. There's no income screening. There's very little conflicting out with two or more parties, or just keeping matters neutral so anyone can be seen regardless. There's a big emphasis on triage to other resources, other professional attorneys, and this is a two-way partnership that can help also to develop advocacy. Next slide, please. More distinctive to the law library part of self-help center integration is the support for existing resources that would not be available in another self-help legal aid kind of environment, and that's all the forms and books and booklets that we have. We also are perceived as a neutral location, friendly, trusted space in the courthouse, which is very beneficial. And for people that use us, that increases our visibility by the clinic users as well as the attorneys that use us. They become more familiar with who we are and what we do, and that's never a bad thing. So that's a way that we can expose our attorney users to our resources as well. So next slide, please.
Okay, well, this is Janine's part, and we're going to just kind of, and since we're running out of time, I think we'll go through it as fast as we can. But basically, I'm just going to say here that law libraries are the bridge to closing that justice gap. And the next slide for you, Sarah.
Oh, okay, Johnny.
Well, we're running out of time, so I did that fast.
Yeah, I know.
Okay, sorry.
Okay, yeah. And I think most people know the justice gap, and these are some resources that further define it. Yep, next slide, please.
There.
So bridging the justice gap, again, Richard Zorz has been one of the great experts and inspirations that's led us along our particular path, and that we will never have 100% access to justice unless there's a system that effectively gets resources to them. And I just wanted to mention that back in 2002, Richard wrote a book called The Self-Help Friendly Court, where he defined what a friendly courthouse should have, which includes space that allows connection, privacy, problem-solving resources, and an educational environment that promotes access technologies. He didn't call it a library, but if that's not a library, I don't know what is, because a library is that and much more, but definitely he was defining the library. And then, of course, he wrote the Sustainable 21st Century Law Library Report years later, after we became more familiar with each other and he saw the value of the partnership and the need for libraries. The partnership's critical to a continuum of services. I just want to say that there's kind of a three-prong approach where law libraries can be, at least the first two are really beneficial. The first prong are those folks that come to the library and can just use resources and know how to take themselves through court. They don't need anything else. The second prong would be those people that can find library resources but need the help of a brief advice clinic or a referral to someone that can give them some brief advice. And then the third would be full representation. So that's the continuum of resources. And again, the first two, giving and empowering someone with basic resources or providing the clinic referral or the referral to an attorney is where the library can be helpful. Next slide, please.
Okay, the access to justice, I think as Sarah said, has to address the needs of people who do not qualify for free legal assistance and those that can't afford the market rate representation. And there are ways of doing that, and that would be innovations in technology, incubator programs, and facilitating pro bono. With technology, there are remote access solutions, and I think The SRLN is in the middle of a remote services study, and that includes Jessica Van Buren's services in Utah and her library. In Maryland, there's a district court that uses chat service in addition to the in-person. Skype is another technology that could be looked into. And we even talked about the form interview assembly programs that could be used. Using technology by asking questions and generating forms makes it a little easier for self-represented litigants. People have talked about some online triage program that could be developed to help with referrals to people. Incubator programs are most often associated with law schools and or a legal services provider like Legal Aid, where new and recent law school graduates are mentored by an experienced attorney, and then oftentimes they'll add pro bono requirement component to that program. So they're getting experience and providing pro bono and getting the mentoring that they could use. But why not consider the law library as the base in this partnership, maybe with the local bar, especially if there's not a law school nearby. You could work with the local legal aid to do something like that. And then pro bono libraries, I think we know, are already instrumental in facilitating pro bono. And next slide for that. Public law libraries are on the front lines. They're providing access to justice for low income and modest means. However, the law library staff is providing educational and self-help services, not legal advice. And then we have the newer attorneys who need employment, they need experience. So, and others are seeking pro bono opportunities to gain experience. And so, as a result, we see many of these lawyer in the library programs. And for the volunteer, for the attorneys, it's attractive for many reasons. There's no in-depth or legal analysis or advice given, and rather the purpose is consultation to determine whether or not there's a legal program and to provide guidance on how they might resolve the issue. There's no continuing attorney-client relationship or a long-term commitment, and you don't have the eligibility requirements. But still, the attorneys are getting volunteer experience in conducting valuable experience in conducting client interviews, spotting issues, and developing strategies. They also have the potential then, the young and solo lawyers, to network and learn from other volunteers, including those senior attorneys. We could talk a little bit here, too, about the specifics of the Lawyer in the Library program, and I'll do that really quickly. What you want to consider is, where do you get the attorneys? What kind of program? Are you going to be general, topic specific? What about malpractice insurance? I'm just going to say that sometimes you can work with another legal service provider and come under their umbrella, and that's what we're able to do here for our programs. And then you're going to decide, is it going to be first come, first served? Might you have a lottery? Might you have appointments? And what you might have to do is you're going to have to adjust. If you have a lot of volume, do you need to add more attorneys? Do you shorten the time they see the attorney? But you just have to adjust as you go along. And what about client disclosure forms, intake forms? What will you do about referrals? Do you want the attorneys referring back to their offices or to programs? And then you got to consider space. Do you have a conference room or maybe a private corner in your library? Or could you work with the public library and use their space? Another opportunity for a partnership. Or is there a conference room in the courthouse that you could use? The other thing that, next slide, to consider is working during the ABA-sponsored Pro Bono Week, which is the last week in October. And that was founded in 2009 to raise awareness of pro bono accomplishments and encourage involvement. So the LA Library has been involved in this annual celebration. And what they do is they have services, but they're highlighting the growing need for legal assistance. They showcase the work of the attorneys. They increase community awareness and support for pro bono. But through this, you recruit more volunteers, and you're facilitating collaborative relationships. And the next slide for Sarah, I think.
Okay, yeah. I just want to remind again that for people that are in a highly agitated state or anxious or whatever, again, the library is recognized to be safe and neutral. As far as maybe a social justice concern, things like expungement clinics where we can level the playing fields. In Minnesota, the statute changed in early 2015 to expand criteria by which people can get criminal expungements. And a hosted clinic that we don't administer, but that's been running here twice a month, we were able to have a conversation with two of the public libraries in St. Paul, and they are now running that clinic out in the public library setting. So just a really great thing to feel like we're filling a much-needed role. Next slide, please. So further considerations for anyone out there looking to start a self-help center. Do you have an unmet legal need? And who would possibly be your partners? Does your state have an Access to Justice Commission or its equivalent? It may not have exactly that title. Are there any LSC-funded providers in your region? And do you have any opportunities to facilitate pro bono, as Joni was mentioning in those last few slides? And with that, I believe we're ready for questions and answers.
Great. Okay, thank you, Sarah and Joni. During our question-answer session, please send your messages to me by chat, and I'll relay questions to the panelists. For any unanswered questions, we'll supply our email addresses in the last PowerPoint slide so that you may send us your questions and comments. Please note that a recording of our webinar will appear on the SRLN website and also on the SCCLL website for later viewing. That includes the PowerPoint slides. And let's see, our first question is, what's involved with recruiting attorneys for the Self-Help Center in the library?
Oh boy, I guess I can take that one. And Joni did talk about, when she talked about pro bono, she talked about some of the benefits that also could be considered as incentives. And I think one thing for our brief advice clinics, a lot of times attorneys much prefer knowing that they're volunteering for something that's brief advice as opposed to something that would be full representation that could take them into more entangling experience with, say, in a family law case. But I know my experience here is that the brief advice volunteers that we get are willing to rotate and come once or twice a month. So they are committed, and we greatly appreciate their services. But other incentives might be that they're exposed to the fact that the library provides free online legal research for the most part. Hopefully they have in mind that there is an aspirational goal in our state. Some states have required reporting, so it's a way to achieve that particular goal or requirement of a state. In Minnesota, we now give CLE credit for a certain amount of pro bono service, and it's up to 6 CLE credits can be awarded. Obviously, for the solo and small firm attorneys, it's an opportunity to network and connect. It's a way to get away from the office. We, in some cases, in some libraries, will provide free photocopying and free services that wouldn't otherwise be available. We've had all run the gamut here of experienced attorneys to brand new attorneys, and they all seem to benefit. And they all, in our case, because we have law students here, they enjoy working with law students and sort of mentoring the law students along.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. Here's the next question. Which access to justice innovations and programs do you hope to see most broadly adopted by law libraries in the next few years?
Well, this is Joni, and I think what I think is like the last model that Sarah talked about, having like the lawyer in the library all the time, so that people would always have access to that service instead of now, like we say, well, if you really need that that component of that we can't provide as a law librarian, to have it be there every day instead of saying, well, you've got to come back on Wednesday to take that further. So I think that I would like to see that here at my library if that were possible.
Mm-hmm. Okay. The next question, For libraries reaching out over large geographical regions, do you know if technologies such as Skype work?
Ooh, this is Sarah. We actually do have one library here that I know of that has, and it's a more rural. It's in the Twin City metro area, but its Scott County Library has effectively put in Skype, and they have a station at the law library, and then the attorney is actually, this is a Spanish-speaking clinic, and so they have a Spanish-speaking attorney at the other end, and they've been effectively able to use that process, and as far as I know, there hasn't been any problems with that. I know our legal aid office also is trying to connect people through chat services where, not particularly in a law library, but they are connecting people through Skype services to meet with clients who are in greater Minnesota and aren't able to come into the metro area here to meet with the volunteer attorney. So yes, those things are being used.
Okay. This question is for Joan, and the person wrote, what does Joan mean by document delivery service or document assembly service for SRLs? This person wanted a sort of a description, I think.
Well, I think by document delivery, I just mean what, and maybe that's really basic and not emerging, but we don't have a big staff, and I mean by document delivery is being able to send to people either by the mail or email or fax something that they've requested. That's something that I rely on for the Maryland State Law Library where James is, because I don't have the staff for that. So maybe that's why I thought of that as more advanced. But just the basic library service, but making it available to the self-represented litigant as well. But by document assembly, I'm talking about those interview where you answer a lot of questions, kind of like the if you ever use a tax program, they ask you a bunch of questions, and at the end they spit out the appropriate form. So you answer the questions. If it's about divorce, you end up with a divorce complaint. So they're two different things.
Okay. This question came through while Sarah was speaking, and it says, is Self-Help Center really the best name for the service? The trend implies human assistance to the pro se litigant.
The question is that.
Would you like me to repeat it?
Yeah, repeat it.
Okay. It says, is Self-Help Center really the best name for the service? The trend implies human assistance to the pro se litigant.
Well, you know, that is a good question, because we have the Family Self-Help Center in the back of our library. And if many times when I say, well, you'll need to go to the Family Self-Help Center, what I used to say, and the question was always, but I need somebody to help me. So I think that's true, that sometimes that is not the best answer. So now what I say is, there's the Family Self-Help Center in the back of the library. There's a legal aid attorney there who can help you. But I think that does imply that nobody can help you. But it's kind of like I don't have an attorney help center, or I don't know. I don't know what you call it, though. But I understand that is...
About a help center, dummy.
So,
Oy.
kind of do it yourself.
Yeah, and I agree that is a good question. I think when I'm thinking of the model in Sacramento County with the attorney on board, I don't know that they necessarily would call it self-help center, but they're talking about attorney on staff program, and they definitely do a fair amount, it sounds like, for a person in the areas that they work in. And then Coral was very emphatic about, they really try to explain to the person they're going to have to read instructions. They kind of define what's going to be the responsibility of the party if they want to continue, but to be fair and candid about it, but also to give them a sense of empowerment that these are resources here in the library that might be helpful to you. But in any case, I think these conversations and the ability to say this is what we're doing. These are defined components of basic, intermediate, advanced. It's taking all of this that we're doing and seeing who's doing it and coming together and saying exactly this kind of thing, challenging. Is this the best name for this? Is there a better way to do that? Is everybody going to be able to deal with recruitment of attorneys? the more we can kind of set up these benchmarks, the more we have the ability to build on this going forward, whether it's a AA-LL meeting. Of course, it would be great to have input from people in the audience to exchange ideas, because that's how we all learn and develop and grow. And so that's why it's great if we can use where we've come so far and then build on that going forward. I think we've got, we've got lots of opportunity to develop.
Yes, thanks for those answers to questions, Joni and Sarah. It's now 2 o'clock and time to bring our question and answer session to a close. I'd like to thank our panelists, SRLN, SCCLL, and all of our attendees. Please complete the webinar survey that Michael will be sending to attendees at the close of the program. We do use those responses in creating webinars and improving our product. We really would appreciate your comments. Thank you all, and have a great afternoon.